Hey guys, Darienne here, and again we're doing another week of In the Flesh. This week I am talking about my experience as a suicide survivor. Here we go.
This is your life, no one else has gotta live it. This is your fight that only you can win.
Hey guys, welcome to the In the Flesh series. I am Darienne, your certified spiritual rock star, and the In the Flesh series is me, in the flesh, talking about my life stories. There are many of them. So I want to first apologize for not being here last week. I was having some health issues for about a week and a half. I was bedridden and I'm still sort of in recovery. I actually have some water here that I need to be drinking because, let me hide the label, because I'm still sort of gaining back my strength, taking lots of vitamins, things like that. So I just did my first Facebook Live. I do them every day, but I just came back yesterday. So I'm in the process of coming back. So I just want to apologize for that first. And now I want to talk about my experience as a suicide survivor and all of the beautiful, beautiful lessons that I've learned in the process, because there's really been a lot. So my daughter's father, my first daughter's father, those of you that know me know that I have two daughters. One is almost 13, and I had her when I was a teenager, and then the other one I just had almost 18 months ago. That's Meadow, who everybody sees on Freedom Friday almost every day. So my first daughter's father, my first daughter's name is Kylie, and her father committed suicide in 2010. We had a very toxic relationship. We were great parents together, but everything else, like we didn't have a great relationship. And so he actually sent out a mass text, like a suicide note, essentially blaming me for his decision to end his own life. And so there were a lot of challenges, but for me, the lesson that I learned the most was I knew at that moment that obviously my whole entire world completely flipped upside down. This was a man that deeply influenced my life for the last 8 years. We were in a relationship for 4 years. We had a 5-year-old daughter at the time. And for 8 long years, he was a deep influence in my life. And we had ups and downs. And just because we had a toxic relationship doesn't mean that we didn't have a lot of really beautiful memories, and of course a really deep connection, having a child, our only child together. So I knew that I had suffered from depression. I was currently, at that time, I was in therapy. I had just quit. That's when I just quit, and I think this will probably be my story for next week, that's when I just quit smoking cigarettes, drinking, and I became celibate. So I just quit my whole party life and bought my guitar, and that was in July, I believe, of 2009, and then the following April is when he committed suicide. And that was, that January was when I won full custody of Kylie. So it was sort of a downward spiral for him. And because I was so fresh out of depression, and I was still in recovery, in depression recovery, and that's totally a real thing, being in recovery of depression. And I had to really watch myself because I knew that it could have been me as well. I was very shocked that I was grappling with the feeling of it should have been me. I was always the one trying to commit suicide. I was always the one depressed, not him. And he ultimately was the one that ended his life. And what was so important to me was I knew I needed to stay alive and stay happy for my daughter. She was the center of everything here. This was her father. I had no way of relating to her. My father I live in my father's house. He owns my home. He doesn't live with me, but he owns this home, and my father is one of my greatest supporters. So for me to, I don't know necessarily what it feels like to be abandoned in that way by your father. And so, and I also knew that she obviously had two parents with mental health issues and a mental illness, history of mental illness. And so, and a lot of like drug abuse and all of that. There were drugs involved on both sides, me and him, which I've talked about from myself. And, you know, what I didn't want was for her to become a teenager and then go deep into a depression or make a wrong turn. So I, you know, as you could imagine, being the one person that was blamed for his death, essentially, I was kind of on everybody's shit list when it happened. And so at the time, that was difficult for me, but I can say this feeling really no emotion right now. Like, I don't feel bad about it or anything. I understood, I grew to understand that everyone grieves differently. That's probably the first lesson that I learned, was that everyone grieves differently. My daughter Kylie was going around to strangers saying, "My daddy died." And that was her 5-year-old way of dealing with that. And it was uncomfortable for a lot of fucking people, but you know, that was her way. And I would never, ever go to her and say, "Kylie, you don't say that to people." Like, I just would never shun her for, and I made it a point to just allow both her and myself to grieve any way we needed to grieve. And so I remember like 2 days later, my phone, I was having an issue. I had like a prepaid phone back then, and it got shut off for some reason. And I was trying, or no, I like got a new phone. The phone broke and I needed to get a new phone, and nobody could get a hold of me, which like freaked everybody out, of course, because they were thinking like, "Oh my God, she killed herself." But I remember talking to this woman in India over the phone on the call center to my phone company. And I just like flipped the fuck out on this woman. Like, I've never flipped out on a human being in my life. And I was like, "My daughter's father just shot himself in the head." I was like freaking out. It was just totally like me lashing out. It was a form of grievance at the time. I mean, it was like 2 days after, it was fresh. It might not even have been 2 days yet. It was still fresh. I don't even think we had the funeral yet. And I was just flipped out on a fucking stranger, you know? And that's what people do when you're grieving. Like, especially I feel like when it's, not that I would ever say that like suicide is harder. Sometimes suicide is harder to deal with, or like murder is really difficult to deal with when it's an unexpected death, or a death that makes you think like, "Oh, this person, he was too young, he was supposed to live a full life," you know, it tends to the ego to be a lot harder to deal with. Again, not saying that my grievance is any more difficult than yours at all, but what happens emotionally is it's not just a sad time, right? It's sad, you miss them, it's confusing, you're angry at them for leaving you. I mean, it is like the ultimate abandonment. And, you know, you just go through this whirlwind of emotions. And it's not just like a regular natural death where you're just sad, okay, oh, they died, they had their beautiful life, and this was it. No, and there's so much unfinished business. Like, we had so much unfinished business, and I was afraid he was going to haunt me. I have a video that I made about how I got over my fear of death in the spirit world, and that began with me being afraid that Joey was his nickname, being afraid that Joey was going to haunt me because of the toxic relationship we had, and because I still had this, not necessarily a belief, but this question: do people that kill themselves go to hell? At the time, I still had that question. And I was like, am I just going to have something from hell just walking around with me? Because I felt him. He was the night of at my bedside. And I was terrified. And then I remember saying to my aunt, I'm afraid Joey's gonna haunt me. Like, I'm really scared Joey's gonna haunt me. And she said to me, well, then he already is. If you're scared, then he's already haunting you. And what that meant for me was the fact that I'm allowing the fear to take me over. That's what was haunting me, was the fear. And that was creating more things to be fearful of. And so that was a beautiful lesson for me. But I did this thing, and now I call it grieving gracefully. I gave everybody hated me. I didn't really give a shit, honestly. I was so laser focused on the fact that me and my daughter needed to be in this beautiful bubble. And I just put ourselves in this beautiful bubble. I gave myself the space to mourn and to grieve. And when I wept, I did it in front of Kylie. I did not hide my grievance. Sometimes you had to, like when you have children and the other parent dies, life fucking goes on. You can't sit around and not do life anymore. You can't sit around and be in your grievance. So for me to grieve in the healthiest way possible was honestly, beautifully, the only fucking choice I had, because I didn't have a choice to just be laid up and lay on the couch all day and go into a deep depression. I didn't have the luxury of going into a depression. And so the next day, I had to be happy. I had, my beautiful little girl who woke up happy. Hey, it's life. I'm in life again, I had to put on my happy face. And sometimes I had to stuff my shit down because it wasn't about me. But then other times, if I was watching a video of Joey, or if I was looking at pictures or something, and I started to weep, and Kylie would say, "Are you okay? Why are you crying?" And I would say, "I'm just sad because Daddy died." And I would just be really, really open about it. I would say, it's okay to cry. It's okay to be sad. I'm okay. I'm just sad. But that doesn't mean I'm not okay. So I was very, in her 5-year-old version of it. And so I'm sure a lot of you are probably asking, did I tell her, or how did I tell her? And did I tell her that he committed suicide? So I thought it was very important to tell her the truth, because I knew that if I didn't tell her the truth, then some blabbermouth in the family or friend circle would open their mouths about it, not knowing, and then it would be a huge betrayal between she and I. And the last thing that she needed was to be betrayed by both parents, right? So in my eyes, I was all she had. And I had to be the best I could fucking be for her. And she really was my sort of muse at the time throughout this entire process. And it just forced me to be a fucking grown-up about things. Like, it really did. It just forced me to just emotionally be a fucking grown-up, get my shit together. It wasn't about me. It was all about her. There was literally a girl saying she wanted to murder me at the funeral. There were people talking shit about me, families speaking, my daughter's Vietnamese, families speaking in Vietnamese with me standing right there talking bad about me. I did not give two fucking shits about what anybody said. All I cared about was that little 5-year-old girl whose daddy just died. That is all I fucking cared about. I didn't give a shit about anybody's petty fucking shit. And the thing was that that's how people grieve. Like, some people just, they like to blame other people. And I am not here saying that it's right or it's wrong, or I'm a victim or not. I'm not saying anything like that. People have their ways of dealing with things, whatever. So when it happened, the day that it happened, actually, the next day is when I told Kylie, and I sat her down, and I really thought a lot about it. So when I first told her, I did not tell her anything about how he did it. I thought that the initial shock of my father is dead would be enough for her to settle in and deal with. So I brought her up to I lived with my father at the time. I brought her upstairs and I said, sit down. And she had this big smile on her face. And I said, I have to tell you something. It's very serious and it's very sad. And I did not want there to be any confusion. So I did not want to tell her that Daddy's up in heaven now or sugarcoat anything. I had to tell her flat out in the most clear way for her to understand that this is final, that you're never going to see him again, not in this lifetime. And so it just said, Daddy died. And she went from this smile on her face to, and she kind of like froze. That was kind of her initial reaction to everything. She really just froze. And, I explained to her, I didn't explain to her everything that happened, but I said, he went into the hospital and he died, and you're not going to be able to see him ever again, but you can pray to him and you can feel his love in your heart. And I gave that whole speech. And then a few days later, after the funeral, actually, let me talk about the funeral. In the funeral, she was being this beautiful, perfect little girl, and she was doing, they're Buddhist, so she was doing the Buddhist traditions and praying, and she had her prayer hands, and she was being a good little girl, because that's how Kylie always was, a good little girl. And then they had this thing where they had to walk around the table a few times, and they walked past the open casket, and she finally got a glimpse of him, and I could see her face. She was in shock. And so I asked her grandfather, I said, can I take her outside? She just saw him for the first time and she's in shock right now. And he said, yeah, take her outside. And I held her. She was stiff as a board. And she just nestled her face into my shoulder, and I just held her so tight. And everybody was trying to console her, and I'm like, I just got to get her out of here. I got to get her out of here. And so I brought her into my car, and we sat there, and then she cried, and I just rocked her and held her and consoled her. And that was tough. It was tough for her. It was tough for everybody. So, but that's what I did. There was this space. It was like this grace. It's all I can explain. It's the only way I can explain it. It was this space between, it was this moment of silence after this shock. Like when you hear shocking news, you almost have this like moment of deep clarity. And that's what it felt like. It was just like this clear space of total love for myself, which the purpose of the love for myself was to be able to bring love to her. And it was just this absolute love circle, and it was a really beautiful process. I mean, I really learned to love myself. I really learned to love my own emotions and love myself for whatever I was feeling, and be really accepting of my deep, dark emotions, and know the difference between obviously depression and just grievance. And of course, grievance is it's a long process. It's not, there's still times where I think about him and I cry. I could cry right now thinking about him, because I miss him. I love him so much more now than I did then. Because that's another thing, is like in my spiritual awakening, which has been such I can't say that that suicide can never come at a good time, but for me, at the point that I was in my life, it couldn't have come at a better time, because I was in a stable emotional place, and I was growing spiritually to be able to be a support for Kylie, to be able to be a support for you guys and bring this beautiful message to you guys. Like, how many suicide survivors are watching this right now? And this is a beautiful message for you guys that you can go through this process really beautifully. It just takes being gentle with yourself and allowing yourself that space, and be really protective. And the only people that are allowed in that bubble of yours need to be the most loving, compassionate, beautiful people. Like you don't even, and that's how I was. I did not even have the space. I wouldn't even let Kylie over her grandparents without me there. Because I wasn't sure how they were going to grieve. I needed to make sure that they were okay with me, because even her being in that energy of her mom being hated, I couldn't allow. So I'm not saying that they did hate me. They are the most beautifully supportive family. I am so grateful to have them. They love her. They've never stopped being family to her. She would sleep over her grandmother's after that still pretty much every weekend. And they love her to death. They love me. They love Meadow. They are so supportive. So I would never sit here and talk bad about them at all because they are my family. But at the time, I wasn't sure where people were at. So I just wanted to be really, really sure that Kylie was going to be in a space where, you know, I wasn't being isolated from her because I didn't want her to have any bad feelings about that. So throughout my, you know, I'm of course in this spiritual awakening and I'm still on this beautiful path, and I had the opportunity to heal a lot of the toxic relationship that I had with Joey. And as a spirit, I learned how to connect with him. I really wanted to connect with him. I was very confused. I wanted to know if he was okay. I felt I couldn't feel him sometimes. I didn't know where he was. I didn't know if he was in hell. I was very confused. I wrote songs about it. I wanted to know if he was okay. That was important for me to know. And so I really connected with him. I had the opportunity to heal that relationship with him. But the ultimate healing came, coincidentally, when I was at Spirit Junkie Masterclass. The first In the Flesh video, I talked about a little bit about how, you know, he came to me. But I want to go into depth about that because I want to share this with those of you who have lost someone to suicide and you're very confused and you're feeling shame about it. You know, there's a lot of shame that can come with that because this isn't the way people are supposed to die. There's lots of stigma around it, you know, like people are cowards if they choose to die. One thing that could bring you and has brought me a lot of solace is Abraham Hicks, who's my favorite guru in the world right now, says that all death is suicide. And what that means is all death is a choice to go from physical to non-physical. It's the spirit's choice. And I truly believe that. And so whether it is physically self-inflicted or you just manifest it, which is technically self-inflicted as well, you choosing to stay around and live or move on to non-physical, I do believe that that's the choice that the whole self makes, right? The spirit. And so I hope that brings you some solace. But this beautiful moment I want to share with you guys when I was at Spirit Junkie Masterclass and Gabrielle Bernstein, the very last meditation we did at the very, very end, right before we left on the very last day. And she says, one woman, you know, said, I want to be able to get permission from my lost family member who passed away to tell their story, and how do I get permission from them? And I said, this couldn't be more perfect for me. And so Gabby said, let's do a meditation and ask our passed on loved ones if we can tell their story, and if so, how would they like us to tell it? This is the part that's really going to make me cry. It's such a beautiful story. So she said, I want you to, you know, we closed our eyes, we did all this, and she said, I want you to, we all sat like this with our fingertips touching as well. And she said, I want you to call out the person's name. And I was scared because I thought, am I summoning something from hell? That's honestly what I thought at the time, because it's still in 2014, I still wasn't sure if hell existed, if there was some dark underworld that we were going to go to, if we killed ourselves. Like, I didn't know, are the Bible stories true? I didn't know any of this. And so when I said his name, I said Joey. And I was really scared. Like, did I just open the gates of hell? But what happened after that was the most beautiful and spiritual experience I've ever had in my life. What he showed me, like, all of a sudden in my mind, I was, not just in my mind, but even physically, but I was, all of a sudden, I'm in heaven. And what heaven looks like is just this, to my perception at that moment, I basically was like at a big party. There was like just all these beautiful, loving beings, and they were my family. They were my spiritual family, my spirit tribe. And we were in this room. The room didn't have walls. It didn't look like anything. I'm not like, there weren't any specifics. I just felt, it wasn't actually a picture in my mind. It was this knowing, right? And I just felt, and really it just looked like black. And then just a bunch of beings, like a bunch of light beings, is basically what that, if I could give it a physical, but of course you can't explain it physically. But what he showed me, that was the very first thing that he showed me. And it was that I am in heaven. This is where I reside right now. I am here all the time. I've never left heaven. I've always been in heaven. I come from heaven. And right now, as I speak this, I can fucking start to sense beings like next to the camera, beings all around me. I mean, it was hundreds of beings, but they were my family. I knew them. They were my family. They loved me, my friends, my beloveds, my supporters, my cheerleaders, my angels, whatever you want to call it. They were all around me, and I was one of them. I was one of them. And what he showed me was that it was just the veil just lifted. It was like the curtain just separated, and this room that I had been in all along, I've never left, I've always been in, I've always come from, has always been here. But the veil between me being able to physically interpret that and physically experience that had been lifted. And for the first time in my life, I got full confirmation that heaven existed and that it's where I'm at right now, and that it is only my mental state pointing away from it or towards it that will allow me to see it. So that was the first thing he showed me. And I was like, tears, just weeping, of course, at this time. And then Joey came to me. But he came to me as just the letter T. Right? Like, like a lot of psychics will say like, oh, I'm seeing the letter T. Like that kind of made sense to me at that point, because I was like, oh, he's just T right now. But his real name starts with a T. So that makes a lot of sense for him to come up as a T. It wasn't just some random letter. His nickname is Joey, but his real name starts with a T. So he came through as a T, and he didn't come through as the Joey that I know on this physical plane, or that I knew on this physical plane. He came through as this beautiful, whole, and evolved spirit. Like it was the whole version of Joey. And what he showed me, and again, I want to reiterate, I saw some things in my mind's eye, but for the most part, it all came through as a knowing. Like it just came through as a knowing, like this is it. And I was like, oh, okay, that's what that means. And oh, that's what that means. It just came, like when you realize something, you're like, that's kind of how it came through for me, as like an aha. So it was just me and him at the time in this dark vastness, these two beings. And he told me that, or showed me that this was the plan all along, that we had come together at the beginning of our lives, and we had planned to have this deep, dark relationship, this tumultuous relationship, to have a child together, and for him to be the one to commit suicide, and for me to be the one to carry on the message to the world. And he just showed me everything. He like put all the pieces together in my life about how my path, my path was the one. That's why I had to be the one to show the message. Like he couldn't have been, if I was the one that committed suicide, he would not have been the one to carry on this message. It just wasn't in his nature. It was in mine. And it makes so much sense, because when we were together, I was never deeply head over heels in love with him. I loved him, but I felt this strong feeling that I had to stay with him. Even though I was always like, this is bullshit, I deserve better than this, I don't even want to be with this dude, but something in me said, no, you have to stay. And so for him to come to me in this spiritual experience, and for, like that, it just made so much sense to me. And then he showed me Kylie, and he said, we're all spiritual partners, and she's going to go off and help people. But but not the way I'm going to help people. She's not necessarily going to help people connected to suicide, but maybe people who've lost their parents. And what's so amazing is now that my daughter's 12 years old, she has connected with people online who say, you know, they want to kill themselves, or they lost their mother, they lost their father, and she's messaged them. She has friends that she messages, like people from all over the world that she messages, and she'll say, you know, my dad died too, and it's okay. And she's just like encouraging to them. So it's a beautiful thing. So it's all coming true, what he said. And he just showed me that we were all spiritual partners. So the message that I got was that he did not die in vain. He died for a purpose. But we have this belief that like suicide is dying in vain. That suicide isn't meant to happen, but it was meant to happen. Because if that hadn't happened, right after that happened, I was a musician at the time. I had a band at the time. I was recording my first album that never ever came out called Rockstar Runaway. It was my pop rock album, my pop punk kind of album. And I remember being in the studio. It was like in a garage, of course, somewhere. And I remember saying, like, I want to start doing charities and charity events and like playing music and getting bands together and do charity events. And that was the beginning of me really catapulting myself into a life of service. And for the next like 3 years, I worked for free. And I did not charge anybody. That was from 2010 until 2013. I just had my spiritual awakening, but I was not living a life of service at all. I my whole life wanted to help people with depression. And this was the thing that catapulted me, because now, think about it. This is how I felt. I had been trying to commit suicide, being suicidal, wanting to commit suicide since I was like 13 years old, right? I had been through the system. I had gone through all that. I've been taking medication. I had drug abuse. I went through all this stuff. And then the man closest to me and the father of my child takes his own life. I now had the perspective of both the person who commits suicide and the suicide survivor. I had all spectrums. I understood him. That was one thing that I definitely had compassion for him, because I understood why he killed himself. I felt so deeply, I could cry about it right now. I felt so deeply sad for him in that moment when he felt so alone. That moment right before he pulled the trigger, that moment of deep despair. And I know, knowing him, that he just went, fuck it, boom, and just did it. I know that he grappled with it, and he did this a few times because I've caught him. I've walked into rooms and saw him contemplating suicide. But this time, he was in so much pain at the time. So I feel bad for that pain that he was in. And I've written songs about that moment. The moment right before he did it, that he was in such deep pain. But then you have to think, right now, like me focusing on that, of course, brings me pain, but I have to know now that the instant that he did it, all that pain was gone. And he was free, you know? And so I think that the message that I want to bring forth to those of you who have survived suicide or have lost someone to suicide, someone that you love deeply and it's affected you deeply, I want you to know that they have not died in vain. Because someone's life has changed because of it. Someone's life will alter. And for me, and if you really don't want them to die in vain, do something about it. Help people with it. Take the message, you know? For me, like, I didn't need any more of a wake-up call. And like I was saying, for the next 3 years, I worked for free and I did nothing but charity events. I did charity events. I ran my own charity events. I did Hope Shines, the charity events. I did a string of charity events. I raised thousands of dollars. I donated a lot of that to Write Love on Her Arms, which is such a beautiful nonprofit that is online and college support, and I was deeply connected to it because I did not know, when I found To Write Love in Our Arms, I did not know that there were other cutters in the world. I didn't know that there were so many other cutters in the world that that they had to make a nonprofit organization about it. So To Write Love on Her Arms, there were a lot of young girls that carve names into their bodies. I have names on my bodies from carving them into my body. I was a cutter. I have scars on my wrists from cutting myself. I was addicted to cutting. It was my way of coping when I was younger, and still have had relapses as an adult. And so that was really beautiful for me. And then the other lesson for people that are struggling with suicide, like, it just woke me up to be able to, and again, I don't want to say that I'm like privileged to be able to see both sides of it, to be able to have witnessed someone deeply close to me commit suicide after all the hell that I put my friends and family through, threatening to kill myself and take my own life. But I feel so lucky to be able to have seen the other side of it, because I know how much more precious life is. I just understand. I have so much more perspective being able to see both sides of it. And another thing, not to be like super cynical and kind of give you a little bit of tough love if you are someone who wants to commit suicide, or if you are someone who, what happens is we get resentful, and when we get into this deep, dark place of wanting to commit suicide, we're like, fuck everybody. Oh, you'll be sorry. You'll be crying at my funeral. We kind of get into that. Like, that's something that happens. It's just truth, And, you almost like want people to just feel so deeply sorry. But at the end of the day, whether you commit suicide or not, life goes on. Nobody's life gets to stop just because you've ended yours. And I don't mean to give you this, I don't mean to be tough, but that's the truth. Like, Joey didn't leave some beautiful legacy. The only thing he left was me to be able to do this. Like, I mean, obviously he left a lot of people, but he didn't leave this beautiful legacy behind. He didn't impact the world. The only way he's impacting the world is through me and probably Kylie and whoever else he could have impacted enough that wants to step out in a huge way and impact the world. But at the end of the day, not everybody's going to do what I'm doing. Not everybody's going to be like, oh, now I need to step out to millions of people and help people, spread this message. What's going to happen is the next day, your 5-year-old little girl is going to need breakfast. And she's going to want to watch Sesame Street. Or whatever she was watching at 5 years old, Dora the Explorer. And she's going to want to laugh and play and have fun. And life is going to fucking go on. And that was a big lesson for me to learn. It was like, oh shit, life doesn't stop after somebody commits suicide. It just doesn't. And that's ultimately, like, if I think about my own mindset being in that, like, writing my suicide note, I can't tell you how many times I've written a suicide note in my journal and just thought to myself, oh, they'll be sorry. You're just in this like low vibe state, so you just hate everybody. But I know that Joey, from his, like, just from reading his, his suicide text, that's what he wanted. He wanted me to be sorry for fucking up his life, I guess. And at the end of the day, the biggest thing is you cannot, nobody has that much power. So if anybody blames you for committing, like when he blamed me for committing suicide, I knew that I've been in that state of wanting to commit suicide, and I've also been in the state of knowing that I cannot blame anybody for my problems. So I know both sides of it, and I know that when you want to change your life, it is your responsibility. And when you continue to blame other people, you give them power. And so I didn't have that much power over his life. No matter, there will still be people to this day that will tell you. I mean, literally, I just heard a rumor that there was some girl talking smack about me in like a fucking nail salon. Girl didn't even know me. And talking about how it was my fault. But it's never somebody else's fault that another human being takes their own life. It's never. And I want to say that because I think it's so important with this bullying epidemic that's going on as well. It's far too easy to blame a bully. But chances are the bully is being bullied at home. Chances are, statistics I believe even show that, correct me, I don't really want to start quoting statistics, but I believe statistics show that most people that are bullies or abusive, there definitely are statistics that show most people that are abusive have been abused in the past. We know that people that are sexually abusive have been sexually abused in the past. There's a great deal of people. So you cannot blame other people for someone's decision to commit suicide. And what I believe is that people that do commit suicide, it's such a beautiful opportunity. One, they go back to their truth. And two, it creates this epidemic that makes people wake up. So sometimes life needs to hit you in the fucking face with a 2x4. Sometimes life has to do that to really wake you up. And so I owe all of my rock bottoms, my huge, shitty, life flipped upside down, divine storms, to my beautiful spiritual awakenings. Because each time I've woken up a little bit more. And then every time I've paid it forward. Every time. Every single time I hit a wall or I get smacked in the face with life, my world gets twisted upside down, I'm like, I have my spiritual awakening, I wake the fuck up, I go back to who I truly am and I say, okay, I got this. This is me. My own life is my responsibility and my experience of the world is my responsibility and my perception of the world is my responsibility, and no matter how fucking shitty I feel, nobody else can make me feel better. Nobody else can change who I am inside. Only I can. And then once I get my shit straight, I pay it forward every time. And so none of it goes in vain. And so Joey's life did not die in vain. And so I hope that kind of puts some fire up under your butt to create something beautiful out of your darkness. The reason I smile is because I just was talking about this on Facebook Live. This book is cultivating within me, and it's all about the magic that happens between light and dark. And really about embracing, like the spiritual practice should be embracing that darkness and bringing spirituality into the darkness, and how the darkness is it's a beautiful thing. It really is a beautiful thing to be able to experience contrast, as Abe Hicks says. So that is my story. I hope that this inspired you. I feel so good about telling this story, and I hope to implement this story into my book and go even deeper into really bringing you into the story and painting the picture for you. And, my writing is a lot more poetic than my speaking is. So, but I really hope that this inspired you in some way. So I would love for you to join the inspiration conversation down below and let me know how this story has inspired you. Let's shed light on suicide. It's not such a fucked up thing. Like, let's shed light on suicide. People are doing it every day. It's becoming the norm. Actually, I think it's every 40 seconds across the globe somebody commits suicide. At least those were the statistics 4 years ago, 5 years ago, or whatever, however long it's been that I was doing all of this work directed towards suicide. So people are doing it, all the time. This is a normal thing. And so we need to not keep it in the shadows. That's what creates the darkness. That's what makes it fester and feel like shit. When we spread light and shed light into the darkness, that's when we can be healed. That's when we can find that magic, right? And so I love telling this story, and I love, because it is helping me to cultivate that book. I cannot wait till that book really just pours out of me, but it's just brewing. It's like brewing inside me. So there it is. I love you guys so much. Please share your inspiration stories down below. Share what part of you feels inspired right now, or what you feel inspired to do by watching this. Please, please share this video with those of you that you know who have lost someone to suicide, or someone that has depression and suicidal thoughts, because this really can help shed light for both sides of the spectrum. And it's a beautiful place I get to stand in, to know, to understand both sides of those spectrums. So I'm very grateful to have learned the lessons that I've learned from Joey's suicide. And I love him for sacrificing his life for me to know this. I love him for sacrificing his life to be able to help you. I love him for sacrificing his physical life. Of course, he's eternal and he's here right now and still lives with us, but I just commend him. I want to tell him that now. I commend you, my beautiful spiritual partner. And I know that he's here with me, making this possible. And I want to send him and all of my beautiful angels off to all of the people that need to watch this. Anyone that's been affected by suicide, or even thoughts of suicide and depression and self-mutilation, and just bring this video to them. Bring this gift to them, because they need to see it. And I ask you, my earth angels, to help me do that as well. So share this. If you feel called to share it, please share it as much as you can. All right, I love you very much. I thank you for the opportunity to tell my stories, and I will see you next week. Oh, as far as the music is concerned, since I'm still coming out of some health issues, I think I'm going to have to release a song maybe on Monday. I haven't even decided what song to release, so you won't see a song at the end of this, but you will see a song this week sometime. All right, I love you guys very much, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Well, I don't know if you'll be in my life ever again. I would be